Awesome. We now know how to add images. But what happens if the image would be in a separate folder? Because currently the image is setting in the same directory. Well, let's try it out. Let's get another image. Let's practice on adding the img element, and then we're going to look for the source as well as the alternative. First, I guess let's start by getting the image, and now we're just going to get a different Udemy image. So I'm going to go with the red one. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. Save as. Let me zoom in just so I can see which option I'm choosing. Save image as. Now we're going to go back again to our file, and let me zoom out in this case. And since I already have a Udemy PNG, I'm going to go with Udemy red, and then whatever the extension is going to be. So I'm going to save my image. Then I'm going to head back to my document. And then within the document, I can see right now that I have two images. Now, what I would like to do is create a new folder. So not a file, but a new folder. And again, we have multiple options. We have this guy, we have new folder. And then, of course, we can also do it here using these icons. So this was creating a new file. And again, let me zoom in. And this is creating a new folder. So it's up to you. I'm going to choose this option. I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this images. Somewhat self-explanatory. And then I'm going to keep the Udemy PNG within the same directory. But I'm going to move my Udemy red one to images. We're going to move it. Okay. Then we're going to close the sidebar. And now let's try to display the second image. So I'm going to go with img. Then we need to look for the folder that is within our directory. So the image right now is not in the same directory. It is sitting within the folder that is in the same directory. And the way we can point to that is by pressing dot here. And then we have the /. And notice if I'm just going to go with dot /, I have again option for looking for Udemy, or I have option for looking for images. And in this case, I'm going to look for images. And then within the images, I have my Udemy red PNG. And in this case, I'm going to write red Udemy image. We're going to save that. And then, of course, side by side, I have two images. I have one green one, and then I have one red one. And now we know that if the folder is in the same directory, then of course we can just go with /. Then before that we have a dot, then whatever is going to be folder name. In our case, that was images. And then we'll look for those images. Now, I also want to point out that technically for now, we can get away if the Udemy image is in the same directory just by typing Udemy PNG. But you also notice that if I'm going to type dot and /, it's going to work. So you're probably wondering, okay, well, what is the difference? You see, later on, as we're going to be working with React, you're going to cover something called a relative path, where essentially I'm just pointing to a folder where I'm currently in, which is going to be, of course, my HTML directory. And then I'm just looking for the file that is in that same directory. So technically, at this point, it doesn't make a difference. If I'm looking for Udemy image, I could just type Udemy PNG without this dot and /. But I would want you to get the practice where you know that this means a relative path, where essentially dot and /. Is going to mean that the asset that you're looking for is going to be in the same directory, because that's going to serve you really well for later web development, because as you're going to be progressing, you're not going to be able to use anymore just this file name. You're going to have to understand how relative path works, and you already going to have a head start if you're going to know that dot and /. Is going to mean that the relative path is for the file that is in the same directory. If there's going to be a directory within the directory, which is the images case, of course, then you would go with dot /. Then you're going to look for that particular folder, and then you're looking for whatever asset you're looking for. In our case, it was, of course, the Udemy red image. And now both of them, of course, are displayed on our web page. All right, we covered how we can display the image that is sitting in the same directory. We covered how we can display the image that is sitting in a separate directory. Now let's take a look at how we can display image directly from the web. So without downloading, we're just going to access image right away. How we're going to do that? Well, notice how we have the source attribute, correct? And we're just pointing where the image is located. So essentially what we can do is we can find the image on the web. We can get the path to that image, and then we can just copy and paste it in the source. Now I'm just going to add some headings just so we can see what is happening. I'm going to add heading 3. And of course, this is also going to be good practice. And I'm going to write green, Udemy logo. We're going to save that. Then right above the red one, we're going to go with heading, I don't know, 2. And then this is going to be red, Udemy logo. And then let's say above the image we're going to get from the web, I'm going to go with heading 1 and I'm going to write YouTube logo. And now, of course, once we have the heading 1, I would want to look for my image. And again, we're going to head back online. We're not going to look for Udemy. We're going to look for Udemy, or I'm sorry, we're going to look for YouTube. Everything is so confusing to me at the moment. Everything is YouTube or Udemy. And I don't know. I guess I'm going to go with this guy. And then instead of looking for the option of save image as, notice we have copy image address. The moment we click on it, we're going to save it in our clipboard. And now, of course, we can head back to our project. Then again, we need to look for img element. And we're going to go with image, of course. Then within the source, we just copy and paste. And then for alternative, I'm just going to write YouTube logo, something like that. And of course, once I do that, I am going to have the image. Now, one annoying thing about getting external images like this is, of course, the length of the source. That's something you cannot avoid, and this is just going to have to live with it. So again, if you're just getting it from local images, then of course it's easy. You just get the correct path. But then if you're going to be getting external images directly from the web, most likely you're going to have these long paths. Now, one thing that I would like to mention, remember when I covered images in the very, very beginning, I said that they should have the /. Now, as you can see, everything is working right now because, again, in HTML5, it doesn't really matter. We can add the / or we can omit it. Everything is going to be displayed correctly. But then eventually, as you're going to be working with, let's say, again, React, if you're not going to add this /, then you're going to get an error that is going to break your code. So again, at this point, just remember that it is optional as we're just working with HTML. But as you're going to be progressing, there's going to be some cases where it is required for you to add this / because as you can see, images do not have the closing tag. They only have one single tag. And then in this case, they would need to be self-closing where we just add the / at the very end before the closing angle bracket. All right, we covered how we can display the image that is sitting in the same directory. We covered how we can display the image that is sitting in a separate directory. Now let's take a look at how we can display image directly from the web. So without downloading, we're just going to access image right away. How we're going to do that? Well, notice how we have the source attribute, correct? And we're just pointing where the image is located. So essentially what we can do is we can find the image on the web, we can get the path to that image, and then we can just copy and paste it in the source. Now I'm just going to add some headings just so we can see what is happening. I'm going to add heading 3. And of course, this is also going to be good practice. And I'm going to write green, Udemy logo. We're going to save that. Then right above the red one, we're going to go with heading, I don't know, 2. And then this is going to be red, Udemy logo. And then let's say above the image we're going to get from the web, I'm going to go with heading 1 and I'm going to write YouTube logo. And now, of course, once we have the heading 1, I would want to look for my image. And again, we're going to head back online. We're not going to look for Udemy. We're going to look for Udemy, or I'm sorry, we're going to look for YouTube. Everything is so confusing to me at the moment. Everything is YouTube or Udemy. And I don't know. I guess I'm going to go with this guy. And then instead of looking for the option of save image as, notice we have copy image address. The moment we click on it, we're going to save it in our clipboard. And now, of course, we can head back to our project. Then again, we need to look for img element. And we're going to go with image, of course. Then within the source, we just copy and paste. And then for alternative, I'm just going to write YouTube logo, something like that. And of course, once I do that, I am going to have the image. Now, one annoying thing about getting external images like this is, of course, the length of the source. That's something you cannot avoid, and this is just going to have to live with it. So again, if you're just getting it from local images, then of course it's easy. You just get the correct path. But then if you're going to be getting external images directly from the web, most likely you're going to have these long paths. Now, one thing that I would like to mention, remember when I covered images in the very, very beginning, I said that they should have the forward slash. Now, as you can see, everything is working right now because again, in HTML5, it doesn't really matter. We can add the forward slash or we can omit it. Everything is going to be displayed correctly. But then eventually, as you're going to be working with, let's say again, React, if you're not going to add this forward slash, then you're going to get an error that is going to break your code. So again, at this point, just remember that it is optional as we're just working with HTML. But as you're going to be progressing, there's going to be some cases where it is required for you to add this forward slash because as you can see, images do not have the closing tag. They only have one single tag. And then in this case, they would need to be self-closing where we just add the forward slash at the very end before the closing angle bracket. Great. Once we have covered how to add images to our project, now let's take a look at where we can get high quality and copyright free images. Because here's the deal. While getting images simply from Google works for your personal projects, you can get into trouble if you're trying to do that with your commercial projects. Therefore, we need to look for copyright free images. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to delete this second image and the third one. So starting from the heading 2, we're going to scroll down, we're going to select everything, and we're just going to delete that. So for time being, we're just going to leave our first image, the Udemy green one. And while there's many sites where we can get nice images, my preference is either using the pixels. And to tell you honestly, this is my most popular option. And by the way, they also offer free videos. And then also you have an option for Pixabay. Once in a while, I use Pixabay. And then there's also something called gratisography. Now, what's cool about this one, the gratisography, is the fact that they have like a funny picture. So if you would want to add something funny to your project, notice you can get a woman with a mustache, for example, or we have a sad bunny sitting on a bench. And hopefully you get the gist. We go to categories, we would look for people, and then in this case, we would get a bunch of funny images. So those would be the sites that I use. And now I want to show you how we can get one of those images. And as a side note, all three sites also have high quality images. Not only they're for free, but you can also get them high quality. So I'm going to head to Pexels. I'm going to look for laptop image. Let's type it in a search. Let's press enter. And then I'm just going to get one of these images. I don't know. I'm going to keep on scrolling. I guess I'm going to go with this guy. So again, we're going to do the same thing. Save image as. In this case, I'm going to still save it in images just so we can get a practice of getting the images from the folder. And then instead of Pexels photo, I'm just going to go with a laptop. Not a lapdog, but laptop, like so. And this should save me my image. Now I'm going to head back to my project. Then I'm going to check whether everything is correct. Yes, within the images, I have my laptop JPEG. Now we're going to close the sidebar. And then let's add another heading 1. In this case, heading 1 with the text of Pexels laptop image. Laptop image. And then we're just going to look for, again, image. Then source, remember, was within the images directory. So that was the path. So again, we do dot /. Then we look for images. And then we're looking for a laptop JPEG. And in this case, as far as alternative, we're going to write a laptop and then Pexels image. Something along these lines. And now we're just going to have a giant image. And that, in fact, brings us to a next point, which we're going to cover in the next video, how we control the width and the height of the images. But don't worry, one of the reasons also why this image looks so bad is the fact that I'm showing this in a small screen and I have zoomed in. Now, just to show you how this is going to look on a bigger screen, I'm going to head back to my bigger browser window and I'm just going to open up a new tab. And then within the tab, remember the address that I was looking for was 127. That was, of course, for my live server. Then I have 001 and then colon 5500 index HTML. That is, of course, my project. And once I do, and once I zoom out, notice currently I have my Udemy image And then, of course, in this case, the second image is displayed a bit better. But the reason why this image is displayed so big, because the width and height for this image is much more bigger than our Udemy one. And this is something that we're going to take a look at in the next video, how we can control that using HTML. Okay, we have our nice image, but how we can display it nicely on our page? Well, one of the ways could be using width and height attributes. Now, let me just quickly mention that while it is one of the options how we can control the size of the image, there are other better ones, which we will cover during the course. The reason why I want to cover this option first is because it uses straight up HTML, our current course topic. With that being said, what is the actual method? Well, that would be using width and height attributes. So the same how we have the source attribute, how we have alt attribute, we also have the width and the height. And before we actually start using the attributes, let me just show you the problem. So what is creating this problem that we have here on the right hand side in the browser? And I'm going to open up the sidebar. And if we check the Udemy PNG, there's many ways how we can check the size of the image. One of the fastest ones would be just clicking on image and then check it out here in the bottom. I'm going to have whole image and I'm going to have 246 pixels by 205 pixels. And now if I'm going to check my laptop one, you're going to see that the laptop one, if you're using the same image from Pixels, or at least some kind of image from the Pixels, it's probably going to be like 1,000 by something. And that's the reason why this image is much more bigger. Now I'm going to close both of these files. Then we're going to close also the sidebar. And like I said, we have the width and height. And I can tell you right away that if we're just going to use the width, we automatically are going to set the height. So technically we can only use the width. And the way it's going to work, anywhere within the image. Again, in this case, I'm placing it before the alt, but you can also place it after that. We have the width attribute. And here we just specifically say what would be the width. And then for my value, you know what? I'm going to double check one more time what was the Udemy one. It was 246. Since I would want both of them to be exactly the same, I'm going to close the sidebar and I'm going to say for this guy, 246. The moment we're going to save it, notice how both images are horizontally exactly the same. So the height still for Udemy is bigger, but at least the width is exactly the same. And if we would want to be more specific about the height, of course, we can just add the height attribute. And then in this case, I'm going to go with, 500. So in this case, I'm going to make my image bigger. If I'm going to go with 200, then of course, the image is going to be smaller. Please remember, again, this would be the width. If we just add the width, then the HTML is going to recalculate the height on its own. So if you would want more specifically add the height, of course you can do that. So the same thing I can do here for my first one, for Udemy, just for practice, we can add a width and let's go with width of 100 like so. So now, of course, my image is bigger. And then just for kicks of it, we're going to go with height. And in this case, I'm going to add 250. So the image, of course, is going to be stretched out. So even though you have big images, you could technically use width and the height attribute to control the height and width of the image. And again, those would be two attributes that we can use, just like we had attribute of source and attribute of alt. Well, it's possible to crop our images using width and height attributes in the HTML. The problem is that we're still rendering this huge image. Now, again, let me check my laptop one, and I'm going to see that the size is 1,000 by 655. And the problem is that the more images like this you're going to have on a page, the slower the loading time is going to be. And the slower your loading times are, well, the faster the users are just going to drop your site. And that's not something that we're looking for. And we have, again, multiple solutions. Technically, we could use a application like Photoshop where we could crop the image. And by the way, I'm going to delete the width and height. But in this video, I'm just going to show you the poor man's version of the Photoshop, where essentially we could use the Mac. Now, if you're using different operating system, you're going to have to do the research yourself. But if you're using the Mac, we can essentially crop the images ourselves, especially if it's some kind of small project. It is going to be much more faster and much more beneficial instead of adding the width and height or learning, let's say, Photoshop. So I'm going to close the sidebar. But before I do, I just want to check the image size again fast. So it was 246. So my goal right now is to make my second one, the laptop one, the width exactly the same. So 246 please remind me if I forget what is the action picks and value. Now I'm going to close the sidebar. Then we're going to navigate back to a desktop. And then with desktop, we're looking for my images folder. Again, let me zoom in. And then within the images, of course, I have my laptop. Now, if I head to laptop and then right click it, I also have an option of open with. Now let me zoom in, open with, and then we have the preview by default. Now I'm going to zoom out, and then we have the tools option. And then within the tools, there is adjust size. So in this case, notice if you have this lock, that means that you're only controlling the width. And then in fact, the height is going to be adjusted for you. So again, if I'm going to go with 246, notice the height is going to be 161. If you're going to click on a lock, then you're able to control the height as well. So in this case, you can go with, I don't know, 300 or 50 pixels, whatever you'd want. Now I'm not going to control it. I'm going to go back to the lock and I'm going to go with 246, just so I can show you that we can have the same width. Now I'm going to zoom out right now. And the good news right now is that, first of all, we're going to have the same images, but the second, we're not loading these massive images anymore. And of course, when I say massive image, I'm talking about my second one, the laptop one. So even though we were able to do it with width and height, the problem was that we were still loading big images. But in this case, I just used Mac operating system to crop my image a bit smaller. So that way, both of them are exactly the same size. And we're not sending giant image files to our user. At the moment, our document is nice and cute. So adding comments would seem like an overkill. But trust me, as your projects get bigger and bigger in size, having comments will save your time more than you think. Now, that will be a case in both scenarios. If you work with a team, that will be especially true because someone else is writing the code. So it is always beneficial if there is some kind of little explanation of what is happening, or even if it's just you working on a project. I know that it's tempting to think that as you're writing the code, you'll always remember what was your actual thought process at that point. But you'll be surprised how fast you will forget your actual intentions. With that being said, in order to create comments in HTML, the syntax would be following, where we would have a angle bracket, then we would add exclamation mark, and then we're going to have two hyphens. And the moment you type it, notice how my line turns green. So now whatever I'm going to write inside the comment, in fact, is not going to be displayed on a page. But of course, we're going to be able to see that in a text editor. So if I'm going to write here, hello there, then you're going to, of course, going to notice that I cannot see the hello there on a page. However, I can see it here in my Visual Studio Code. Now, also, there's a shortcut for that. And the shortcut would be command and /. And as you can see right now, we're creating comments. And again, comments would be good for two things. First of all, we could use it for grouping. So as your projects get bigger and bigger, then of course you can just add comment where you would have one section starting and the second one section ending. Let's imagine that again, this would be a huge section of code. Then you could write here Udemy logo. Then you would end here. You would say end of Udemy logo. And then you would do the same thing again for heading one. Now, of course, it's up to you. You can technically just go with one comment where you have Udemy logo. And then this, for example, is going to be a laptop logo. And like I previously mentioned, I know that at this point, it seems like an overkill. You're thinking, well, okay, I have two images. Why would we be adding comments? As your projects get bigger, this will come in handy where essentially you're just grouping the code. And also, of course, as you're having some kind of logic, you would explain of what is actually happening, whether you're creating a nav bar or whether you're creating a link, and you would want to leave some kind of note to yourself for the future. Because also, like I previously mentioned, even though at the moment, as you're writing the code, you think, oh, all right, I always will remember what I'm doing here. In fact, trust me, you will forget sooner than you think. Now, another neat thing about the comment is that I can comment out the code and it's not going to be displayed on a page. Where you would use that? Well, if you want to test some kind of section, because let's say you're looking for some kind of bug and you know that it is in that particular place, but you have, I don't know, another 100 lines or whatever lines of code, and you wouldn't want to mess with those lines. You just want to work with those specific lines where you know you would have the bug. Well, if I know that I have some kind of problem here, what I could do is I could just comment out starting everything from heading 3 all the way to the end of my image. How I would do that? Well, I can select everything here and just press the comments. That would be one thing. Another way I would do that, of course, I can just cut it out and place it within a comment. It's really up to you. So in this case, I'm going to select everything. I'm going to comment it out. I'm going to save it, and notice how I only have my second image because now I commented out this line of code. And the same, by the way, is going to work with CSS, with JavaScript, where essentially you can divide up the code because that way it's going to be much, much faster to find the error if you have one. And one more thing that I would want to show you is that we can use the line breaks in HTML. Because if you remember, and by the way, at this point, I think I'm just going to delete the comments for now. I'm just going to leave the top one here. Remember that if we were trying to add some kind of space, this wouldn't work. So if I'm trying to add space in between heading 3 and image, well, this wouldn't work. Now, also, I want to mention that even though I'm going to show you the line break, in most cases, you're going to use CSS for that if you'd want to have some kind of spacing here. But there's also an option in HTML where we can use the line breaks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I don't have any spaces, just so you don't get confused of how we're getting that. And the way it would work in HTML, we would add a line break element. And as you can see, as I'm typing BR, this right away gives me my line break element. And in this case, I have one. That's why I have a little bit more space. But if I'm going to copy and paste it, and again, I'm going to do this the long way. And later, I'm going to show you what it would be the shortcut, but copy and paste. 1, 2, something like that. We're going to save it and notice how I have right now the space in between my two elements. And now I'm going to copy and paste, and I'm going to do the same thing just so we have some space in between the Udemy image and the laptop image. Let me delete this guy. This still stayed. We're going to save that. And now, of course, I have both spaces. I have space in between the heading 3 and the image and whatever I have here. In this case, heading 1 and another image. Again, just to recap, in order to create a comment, this would be the syntax, or the shortcut would be command and /. And then we right away can create a comment. We can add whatever we would want here for the future notice. And also we can comment out the code if we would want to test some other particular code in our document. In order to keep the ball rolling, next I would like to cover links in HTML. And essentially, links allow our user to navigate somewhere, whether that's to some external resource around our project, so from page to page, or within a single page. And since we already covered comments, now I'm going to create some comments of what links we're going to cover. So here I'm going to write external. That's going to be one case. Then we have internal link. And then also we're going to have a single page link. So those are going to be links that just navigate around a one page. And you know what? I'm also going to do a bit of spring cleaning where I'm going to delete the line breaks and then the second set as well. And I'm not going to keep the heading 1 with a laptop image. So let's just delete that. Now, in this case, I'm going to move this line of code, the Udemy logo, a bit down. And again, I'm going to show you the shortcuts a little bit later on, but essentially this is what I'm going to have. We're going to create our links in the following videos up here on the top. And then at the moment, I'm just going to have a comment that this says Udemy logo. And of course, we have a heading 3 with our image. We're going to save that. And this is what we should have on the right-hand side. So external links, or essentially links that allow our user to navigate away somewhere from the page. How we would create them? Well, we already know the spiel. We would need to create an element first. And the syntax for the link would be A. So just press A, and then you're going to have multiple options here. So you have a blank one, you have a link, you have mail and telephone and all that, but you're just looking for the simple one. So just press tab or enter again, and then you're right away going to have your link, and you'll notice kind of something interesting where you're going to have the href attribute. Now we're going to focus on href attribute in a second. For the time being, whatever you're going to display here on the page is going to be written in between the tags. So in this case, if I'm going to say navigate here, and we're going to save it, notice now we're going to have a link, essentially clickable link. But at the moment, as we're clicking, of course, nothing happens. We're not navigating anywhere. Why? Because we haven't filled out the href attribute. And as far as the href attribute, well, similarly how we had for the image, where we needed to provide the path in the source attribute, in this case, we need to provide the path to our external resource. And if we would want to navigate to Google, we would write HTTPS, then colon, then two forward slashes, www, and then google.com. We're going to save that. And of course, the moment I'm going to click on the link, we're going to navigate to google.com. Of course, we can navigate back and we're back on a page. Now, there's a couple of things. First of all, whatever you're going to write as a content is not going to serve as a link, meaning this just represents of what you're going to be showing on a page. I could write here Facebook, and we're still going to navigate to Google. Why? Because that is the actual value for the href. So in this case, you can write whatever you would want on a page. Essentially, you're going to navigate where the href is pointing to. So that would be the case number one. Case number two that I would like to show you, that if you're struggling of, let's say, remembering the actual URL, shortcut would be following, where I could just say Facebook, and then you can just copy and paste the URL. So just grab here the URL, then you're going to navigate back, and then I'm going to delete whatever I had for the Google. Let me delete it. And once you copy and paste, notice you right away are going to have the HTTPS, then colon, forward slash, and then whatever was the URL. So that way it creates a bit faster workflow. And also I would like to mention that we have an option of adding one more attribute where the user essentially is going to open up a new tab. Because currently what happens if I click on a Facebook, notice I navigate away from the page. And that's not what I'm looking for. I would still want my user to be on the page and just open up a new browser window. And the way it works, we would go with target. That would be the attribute. And then the value we need to provide is underscore blank. So in this case, if I'm going to open this up in the new window, well, I'm not going to navigate away from the page. So notice I still have my document. So the user still has my page. But then if there is external resource, we just open up a new window. So just to recap, as far as external resources, the syntax is A, then we create a link. Then within the link, whatever we're going to type as a value is going to be displayed on the page, but it's not going to affect where the user is going to navigate. Essentially, if we would want to navigate somewhere, we would need to provide this value within the href attribute. So whatever value we're going to provide within the href attribute, that's where the user is going to navigate. And if we wouldn't want our user just to leave the page, if we would just want to open up a new browser tab, then we would add target attribute with a value of blank. And once we have covered external links, why don't we take a look at the links that would allow us to navigate within our project? So essentially from page to page. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do a bit of a setup, where right now for the title, I have the document, but just so we can clearly see of what is happening, I'm going to go with home. So right now my title is going to be home. And then I'm also going to change the path for the image, because I'm going to move my Udemy PNG into all images folder. So since we already have practiced how to work with relative path, I'm just going to move it. Now this is going to be in the images. And of course, the image is not going to be displayed. Why? Because the path is not correct. So again, just to jog our memory, we would need to have a dot, then forward slash, then we would need to have actual name of the folder, since right now all the images are in the images folder. And then once we have that, then of course we're going to look for Udemy PNG. And the moment we do that, again, we have our Udemy image. Now in this case, I'm just going to keep this as external link. And then I'm going to add maybe a heading 3, or I don't know, heading 2, maybe a external link, just so I have some explanation here on the page. So I have the external link to a Facebook, but then we're going to have some internal links. So in this case, I'm going to go with heading 4. And I'm going to call this internal links. We're going to save that. And now after the heading 4, we're going to still go with target. But then, of course, our value for the href is going to be different. So we're going to be navigating to about HTML. And I'm going to write about page. Okay. Now I created the link. But then, of course, if I'm going to click on the link, again, nothing is going to be displayed because browser is going to complain, cannot get about HTML, because we haven't created our second about HTML page. And this is the case where I said that we can name our page however we would want. The most important one is the index HTML. So even though I'm navigating to about HTML, I could technically call this a little bit different. I could call this about me HTML or whatever. As long as the href matches whatever is going to be the file name, technically you can write here whatever you would want, whether that's about page, contact page, and hopefully you get the gist. Where index HTML, that's the most important one because that is our homepage. Now I digressed a little bit, but I'm going to create about HTML since of course that is my href already. So that just makes sense. About HTML, let's jog our memory again, where if you would want to create the HTML structure, we would need to look for exclamation mark. Now, of course, we're creating everything that we would want. Within the title, I'm going to write about page like so. And then in the body, I'm just going to have a comment, internal links or link. I guess we can just keep it single. Then we're going to add a heading 2 again, or whatever we would want, just so we can practice on some headings. Internal links. And then after internal links, we're going to have again a link. And in this case, link is going to head back to index.html. So what would be the href? Well, it needs to match whatever is the file name, because essentially we're creating another page. And then in that case, I'm going to say index.html, and we're going to say back home, or back to homepage, or whatever you would want. We're going to save that. And now, of course, if I'm going to refresh, I'm going to see that I have my about page because we just created, and we have an option of navigating back home. So the difference would be if we have external link, of course, we have this HTTPS, and then we have the actual URL where we would want to navigate. Now, if we want to navigate around our project, well, we just need to match whatever the page name is. So essentially, what is the file name for the page? So if the page name is about HTML, the href needs to match that actual file name. And then we can again write whatever you would want in between the tags, because that's just going to be displayed on a page. So if you would want to write that that is about page, then of course we can write about page. If we're going to write back home, then most likely it makes sense that if the value for our href is actual homepage, which is index.html.